Elizabeth was once a Hollywood star in her prime, but now those glory days are behind her. Unable to bear the reality of her aging self, she injected a mysterious, perfect serum, hoping it would restore her youth. Instead of regaining her beauty, she transformed into a grotesque monster. The story began a few days earlier when her boss, Fred, decided to fire her due to her age. He was determined to replace Elizabeth with a younger, more attractive host. After the meeting, Elizabeth, lost in thought and overwhelmed by the news, walked home in a daze. On her way, she saw workers taking down her old billboard ad. Depressed and distracted, she didn't notice a car speeding toward her. The crash left her severely injured, but fortunately, she was rushed to the hospital and survived without life-threatening damage. As Elizabeth was about to leave the hospital, a young doctor suddenly grabbed her and pressed on her spine, leaving her confused. It wasn't until she had left the hospital that she discovered a small USB drive in her pocket. Out of curiosity, she plugged it into her computer and found a strange video. The video explained that with just one injection, anyone could create a younger version of themselves. The catch? Only one of the two could be awake at any given time, and the body would alternate between the two every 7 days. At first, Elizabeth didn't take the video seriously, but as she watched her reflection age day by day, her desperation grew. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. One night, she called the number from the USB, eager to buy the product. The next day, she was given an address and found the perfect serum waiting for her in a safe. When she returned home, Elizabeth wasted no time injecting the serum into her body. But instead of feeling rejuvenated, she grew dizzy and collapsed to the floor. What happened next was terrifying. Something inside her body was trying to break free. Her back began to tear, her skin peeled away, and her eyes split into two pupils, undergoing a grotesque transformation. When she regained consciousness, a younger version of herself had emerged. She wiped the fog off the mirror and saw her youthful face staring back. But it wasn't really Elizabeth anymore. It was a parasitic version of her. Despite the strangeness of it all, Elizabeth felt an overwhelming satisfaction with her youthful appearance. The smooth skin, the fresh face, it was everything she had longed for. But there was a problem. The older Elizabeth, her true self, still lay on the floor, and her back needed to be stitched up. The younger Elizabeth, now fully equipped with all of the original's memories, went about sewing her up. Just as she started enjoying her new body, she suddenly experienced a nosebleed. It dawned on her that this was likely a side effect of the serum. Panicked, she remembered there was an extractor she hadn't used yet. She quickly inserted the needle into the older Elizabeth's bone marrow, drawing out 7 full doses. This would give her control over the body for an extended period. She injected the drawn substance into herself, feeling her body come alive once more. After discarding the needle, the younger Elizabeth fully replaced the real one and began living her life as the new, youthful version. Her beauty and stunning body immediately caught the attention of her former company, and before long, she was a sought-after local model. Life seemed perfect until the 7th day arrived. On that day, the younger Elizabeth prepared the syringes, inserting them into both of their wrists. As the blood exchanged, the real Elizabeth took back control of her body. Like a knight awakening from a long slumber, she looked down at her beautiful younger self with a mixture of jealousy and resentment. It was finally her turn to live again, but without work or purpose. She found herself aimless, spending her days locked in the house, unsure of her future. Soon enough, the 7th day came again, and the bodies swapped once more. The younger Elizabeth had fully embraced a life of indulgence, eating, drinking, partying, and enjoying herself. However, she soon began to see the real Elizabeth's body as a nuisance. To solve this, she locked her away in a hidden room, ensuring that even if she brought a man home, there would be no evidence of the older Elizabeth. But while embracing her boyfriend one evening, the younger Elizabeth felt a sudden dizziness, and blood began to drip from her nose, startling the man. She rushed to the bathroom, where her nose started pouring blood uncontrollably. The time for the body swap had come again, and her body was signaling the change. But the younger Elizabeth didn't want to surrender control to the grotesque version locked away in the hidden room. Determined to hold onto the body for longer, she secretly drew another vial of stabilizer for herself. The next morning, when Elizabeth woke up, the room was a complete mess. A note was stuck to the window. Just as she reached out to grab it, she was horrified. Her fingers had started to visibly age. She knew this had to be the work of the younger Elizabeth. Panicking, she immediately called the company, explaining that her doppelganger was out of control and had been abusing the stabilizer, forcing Elizabeth to bear all the side effects. Her fingers were already showing signs of aging, but the person on the other end, clearly from a shady company, hung up on her without a second thought. The following day, Elizabeth went to a restaurant where she unexpectedly encountered a strange old man who seemed like he wanted to tell her something. Elizabeth noticed the dark spot on his hand, one identical to what she had seen on the young doctor who had treated her. Just as she was trying to figure it out, the old man dropped something, revealing a number tag and a scar on his back. It became clear he too was a customer of the perfect serum and the young doctor was his other self. Terrified, Elizabeth rushed to leave the restaurant. That night, scared and anxious, Elizabeth called an old friend. Realizing she couldn't break the contract with the younger version of herself, she decided she might as well enjoy the moment. Determined to embrace her wild side, she put on what she thought was a sexy dress and stood in front of the mirror, applying heavy makeup in preparation for a date that evening. However, she couldn't help but be dissatisfied with the aging face staring back at her. She grabbed a scarf to cover the wrinkles, but as time passed, she grew more and more disgusted with her appearance, especially after seeing a photo of the younger Elizabeth. Her own face seemed all the more hideous. Consumed by self-loathing, Elizabeth spiraled into a state of madness. She was convinced that no one could ever love this old and decaying face. Overwhelmed by her feelings of inadequacy, she ultimately decided not to go on the date. Soon enough, the younger Elizabeth awoke again. Ready to make the most of her limited time, she was devastated to find the office completely deserted, her TV show mysteriously canceled, and her boss summoning her to his office. With a heavy heart, she walked in, ready to demand an explanation. But instead of a reprimand, her boss burst out laughing. As it turns out, the show's ratings had skyrocketed, and the audience now demanded more excitement. The company had decided to let her host the Christmas Eve show. Hearing this, the younger Elizabeth smiled with satisfaction. But if things were going the way her boss had described, then 7 days wouldn't be enough. Once back home, she ruthlessly began extracting more stabilizer from the real Elizabeth's body, drawing a syringe every day to extend her own time and control. After about 10 days, the real Elizabeth finally woke up, but her body had already withered into that of an elderly woman. She looked like a frail old lady, her body completely drained. Furious, Elizabeth called the company again, demanding to end the contract. But the representative coldly informed her that if her other self disappeared, she would never regain her former appearance. She would remain trapped in her current form forever, looking like a decrepit old woman, staring at her reflection, her gaunt and withered face barely resembling a human being. Elizabeth had no choice but to withdraw her request. Overcome with rage, she trashed the room, venting her frustration at the younger version of herself. When the younger Elizabeth awoke the next day, she was livid at the mess. Enraged, she stormed into the room, viciously plunging the syringe into Elizabeth's body and drawing several vials of stabilizer. Completely disregarding the rules of the game, 3 months passed, and the younger Elizabeth had started a relationship with a wealthy man. She had become a public figure, known to everyone, but all her success had come at the cost of the real Elizabeth's time. However, one day, as the younger Elizabeth went to extract more stabilizer, she found that there was none left. Panicking, she called the company again, asking what she should do now that there was no stabilizer remaining. The response was chilling. If she wanted more stabilizer, she would need to regenerate Elizabeth's original body. Before she could process the words, her body, deprived of the stabilizer, collapsed to the ground. Desperate, she crawled towards the bathroom, hoping to grab another syringe. But as she struggled, she fell hard to the floor, the loud thud echoing through the room and catching her boyfriend's attention. Elizabeth, now too weak to care, crawled towards the warehouse. With a blood-curdling scream, the real Elizabeth suddenly awoke. Hearing the commotion from the bedroom, her boyfriend rushed to the bathroom, sensing something was terribly wrong. But when he arrived, what greeted him was the terrifying sight of Elizabeth, completely drained and reduced to a monstrous figure. Looking at herself, she could hardly believe it. She had just wanted to become young and beautiful again, but now she had turned into a horrifying creature. Elizabeth's anguished screams echoed through the bathroom, her deep, guttural voice terrifying her boyfriend into fleeing from the scene. The next morning, Elizabeth wrapped herself tightly in layers of clothing and returned to the safe to retrieve the termination serum. She dragged the young Elizabeth's body back to the room and prepared the syringe. As she was about to inject the serum into the younger version of herself, she hesitated, unsure of what to do next. The thought of ending this twisted service pained her, and just then, a man's voice echoed in the room. He spoke as if he knew her every thought. That as Elizabeth stood there, ready to inject the serum into the young Elizabeth's body, memories of her younger self flashed before her eyes. How admired and respected she once was. Her resolve faltered. Slowly, she pulled the syringe away. She couldn't bring herself to end the life of her youthful counterpart, especially with her big performance scheduled for that evening. She hurried back to the bathroom, grabbed the injector, and inserted the needle into both their bodies. As their blood flowed in reverse, the young Elizabeth was miraculously revived to her shock. The real Elizabeth didn't fall asleep this time. For the first time, the two of them existed together in the same moment. The young Elizabeth, seeing the termination serum on the floor, instantly realized what had just happened. She knew that the real Elizabeth had been on the verge of killing her. Before the older Elizabeth could explain, the young one lunged at her, trying to finish what had almost been done. In the end, the real Elizabeth was beaten to death, her life cruelly taken by her younger self. But tonight was supposed to be her grand performance, her big night on stage. The younger Elizabeth thought she had finally won, finally secured the body all for herself. However, no sooner had she claimed victory Then an excruciating headache seized her. She ran to the bathroom, vomiting violently, and looked up to see her teeth falling out. Her body was rapidly deteriorating. Despite the alarming state she was in, she knew the show had to go on. As she made her way to the stage for the performance, she was stopped by her boss. Fear gripped her, worried they might discover her secret. She managed to shake them off and staggered back to her dressing room, desperately trying to replicate her former beauty one last time. She injected herself with the serum again, hoping to create a clone. But when she opened her eyes, she had turned into a hideous monster. Determined to salvage the night, she dressed herself up to resemble Elizabeth once more, limping her way onto the stage. Just as she began to speak, her mask fell off. The audience gasped in horror at the sight of her disfigured face. Cries of "monster" filled the room as the crowd fled in terror. In a tragic and dramatic end, Elizabeth, having overdosed on the serum, suddenly exploded on the spot, leaving nothing behind but memories of her once glorious life. In the end, the pursuit of beauty is a natural human desire, but an obsession with it can lead to tragic consequences. True worth comes from within, not from outward appearances. Remember, once you stop, you can never go back. It's all up to you.